December 4th, 2010. A tall 16-year-old boy stepped out of a boarding school in Virginia and vanished into the freezing night. No money, no ID, no trace. Was he a runaway or the victim of something far darker? This is the story of Forest Shuldt. The night air in South Boston, Virginia, carried a bite that only December can bring. The Carlbrook School campus, remote, tucked away in the quiet back roads, seemed like any other boarding school preparing to settle into the long hours before curfew. But at 7:30 p.m. on December 4th, 2010, one tall, sandy-haired boy slipped through the fading glow of the dormitory lights and walked into the darkness. His name was Forest, 16 years old, 6'2", with blue eyes that friends remembered as both guarded and searching. That night he vanished into the cold, and no one has ever seen him again. In the opening hours, few even realized what had happened. At a place like Carlbrook, teenagers often dreamed of escape: a strict campus, heavy rules, a past filled with students carrying burdens from earlier schools or treatment programs. It wasn't unusual for whispers of running away to float around, but this time it wasn't a rumor. It was real. Forrest had taken some clothes, borrowed a pair of white Chuck Connor sneakers, pulled his hoodie tight against the wind, and disappeared down a path that seemed to erase itself behind him. Witnesses? None that came forward with certainty. Cameras? There were none along the wooded roads stretching toward Danville, or maybe even as far as Durham. Only the echo of a door closing and then silence. For his family, for his classmates, and for investigators, that silence became louder with every passing day. To some, it looked like a runaway, a boy tired of discipline, chasing freedom on the other side of those guarded gates. But to others, it felt different, too sudden, too risky, too incomplete. Forrest left without money, without identification, in the dead of winter. Was he truly running towards something, or had something darker pulled him away? The questions have lingered now for more than a decade. What happened after he walked off into the night? Did he make it to a bus, a truck stop, a back road no one cared to search? Did someone find him out there, vulnerable and alone? Or did his story end within just a few miles of where it began, hidden by the Virginia woods and the secrets of a campus that preferred not to look too closely? This is not just the story of one boy who vanished. It's the story of a family left waiting, of a school that turned a blind eye, and of a community that still wonders how a teenager can simply disappear into thin air. Tonight we step back into that winter evening in 2010 and follow Forrest's last known steps, hoping the darkness might finally give up its secrets. Before that cold December night, Forrest was not just another name on a missing persons list. He was a teenager with a complicated story, caught between the expectations of adults and the turbulence of adolescence. Born in 1994, he grew up with sandy blonde hair, striking blue eyes, and a tall frame that made him stand out among his peers. Friends remembered him as intelligent and introspective, someone who often seemed to think a little deeper than the room around him. But behind that quiet demeanor lay struggles that had already shaped much of his short life. Forrest wasn't attending an ordinary high school. By 16, he had already cycled through programs designed for troubled teens. Before arriving at Carlbrook School in South Boston, Virginia, he had been enrolled at Diamond Ranch Academy, a residential treatment center in Utah. These institutions were marketed to parents as solutions, strict, highly structured environments meant to redirect kids dealing with academic, behavioral, or emotional challenges. For some families, they offered hope. For others, they felt like exile. At Carlbrook, Forrest was one of many teenagers sent far from home. The school, hidden away in the quiet stretches of Virginia countryside, was known for its secrecy and its rigid rules. Days were heavily scheduled, from academics to therapy sessions, with little freedom and almost no contact with the outside world. For Forrest, it was an isolating place. Letters and phone calls were rare privileges. Visits from family were few and carefully controlled. His world had narrowed to dorm rooms, classrooms, and the wooded campus that seemed to stretch endlessly around them. Yet even within that confinement, Forrest carried dreams. Some classmates recalled his determination to push forward, to find meaning beyond the walls of the program. Others noticed his restlessness, the way he would sometimes stare out toward the tree line as if imagining another life just beyond reach. A scar on his chest marked him physically, but the more lasting marks were invisible. Moments of frustration, moments of hope, moments of wondering what his future could be if only he were free. This was the world Forrest lived in before the night he vanished. A teenager suspended between discipline and longing, between the boundaries of a school and the limitless horizon of his imagination. It was a world that seemed safe on the surface but was already carrying him toward the shadows of an ending no one saw coming. Carlbrook School did not look like the kind of place where someone could simply vanish. From the outside, it resembled a peaceful retreat. Brick buildings set against Virginia's rolling fields, long gravel roads winding through woods that muffled the noise of the outside world. But to those who lived within its gates, the school was not an oasis. It was a fortress. Students there carried heavy labels: troubled, rebellious, difficult. Parents sent them with the hope that the program's rigid discipline would reshape their futures. The reality, however, was far harsher. Days were dictated down to the minute. Wake-up calls before dawn, therapy sessions framed as mandatory, classes with strict seating charts, and evening check-ins where even the smallest infractions could lead to punishment. Privacy was rare. Autonomy, rarer still. Former students would later describe the atmosphere as suffocating. Some spoke of a culture of silence, where emotions were controlled as tightly as schedules. Others remembered the constant feeling of surveillance, like eyes were always watching, peers, staff, the institution itself. In this closed system, individuality often felt like defiance, and defiance was swiftly corrected. For a boy like Forrest, the gates were more than physical barriers. They were reminders of his confinement. Letters to family were censored, calls home limited. Holidays were spent under supervision, celebrations muted by rules. Even friendships came with boundaries. Too much closeness could be interpreted as rebellion. In such an environment, the idea of escape wasn't just fantasy, it was a form of survival. And yet, there were no obvious cracks in the routine. The staff kept records, roll calls, curfews. Students rarely left the grounds except under escort. To outsiders, Carlbrook seemed orderly, structured, safe. But behind those walls, beneath that order, lay a truth the school rarely acknowledged. When you strip away freedom from a teenager, you don't erase the longing for it. You intensify it. Forrest wasn't the first student to dream of slipping away from Carlbrook's control. But on that cold December night, he would be the one who tried and succeeded, if only for a fleeting, chilling moment. The day had been uneventful, the kind that faded quickly into memory, until night fell. December 4th, 2010, carried the weight of winter in South Boston, Virginia. Temperatures dropped, the air sharp and dry, the sun long gone behind the bare trees. By 7 o'clock, the campus of Carlbrook School was cloaked in quiet, only the muffled sounds of students inside their dormitories breaking the stillness. At 7:30 p.m., Forrest made his choice. He slipped on a dark hoodie, jeans, and the white Chuck Connor sneakers he had borrowed from another student. Some accounts suggest he also wore a burgundy Carhartt jacket, thicker, warmer, practical against the cold. He carried a few clothes, just enough to suggest planning, but not enough for survival on his own. Then, without drawing attention, he stepped away from the safety of the lights and into the shadows of the tree line. The campus gates were not impossible to reach, but they marked a point of no return. Students rarely crossed them without permission. For Forrest, each step carried risk. Did anyone notice? A creak of a door, the scuff of his shoes on gravel. No alarm was raised. To those around him, the evening seemed as ordinary as any other. But for Forrest, it was the night of departure. Some would later speculate that he had a destination in mind. Danville, a nearby city with bus routes and anonymity, or Durham, North Carolina, farther south but reachable if he found a ride. Yet no one could confirm. His path beyond the school grounds was invisible. No cameras, no witnesses willing to say they saw him pass. The woods swallowed him whole. The image of that night lingers. A tall, blond boy disappearing into the cold, his breath fogging in the air, the borrowed shoes too bright against the dark earth. It could have been a runaway story, a teenager seeking freedom. Or it could have been the first moment of something far more ominous. The truth lay somewhere beyond those trees, and with each hour that followed, it grew harder to recover. That December evening marked the last known sighting of Forest, an exit as silent as it was final. When Forrest's absence was discovered, the first whispers came quickly. He ran away. At a school like Carlbrook, the assumption felt almost automatic. Teenagers had tried it before, slipping off campus in search of freedom. To administrators and even some classmates, the idea made sense. A boy restless, frustrated by rules, finally took his chance. But as details trickled out, doubt began to spread. Forrest had left with only a few clothes. No wallet, no identification, no money of his own. His sneakers weren't even his. They were borrowed. Who plans a long journey with so little? And if he truly meant to reach Danville or Durham, how could he have managed the trip alone, on foot, in the freezing night? Investigators weighed the possibilities. On one side, there was the profile of a runaway, a troubled student, far from home, yearning for independence. On the other side, the glaring gaps. No confirmed sightings after he left campus. No phone calls to friends. No letters left behind. The silence was almost too complete, as if the trail had been cut short before it began. Families of other students noticed the same contradictions. Some wondered if Forrest had arranged to meet someone, an acquaintance, maybe even a stranger, who promised a way out. Others whispered darker possibilities, that the woods surrounding Carlbrook concealed more than anyone wanted to admit. The runaway label, once applied, shaped the investigation from the start. Authorities believed he had chosen to leave, and so the urgency to search was muted. No helicopters hovered overhead, no large search parties combed the countryside. Instead, a boy vanished, and officials waited for him to come back on his own. But Forrest never did, and the question hung in the air. Had he walked away by choice, or had something far more sinister claimed him in the cold Virginia night? In the hours after Forrest left, the campus stayed quiet. No alarm sounded. No staff reported seeing him slip into the night. By the time anyone realized he was gone, the trail was already cold. What remained was a haunting absence, and the unnerving truth that no one could say exactly what had happened. There were no cameras lining the gravel roads, no streetlights to capture a silhouette moving against the dark. Students who might have seen something stayed silent, either because they hadn't noticed or because they feared speaking out. One boy remembered hearing footsteps outside the dorm, but he couldn't say if it was Forrest or just the wind-stirring gravel. Another student thought she saw someone heading toward the tree line, but the shape disappeared too quickly to be sure. Each account was vague, fading like smoke. Authorities searched for leads. They checked bus stations, asked drivers, called nearby shelters. Nothing. No ticket purchased in his name, no sighting at convenience stores or diners. Forrest had vanished between one step and the next, leaving behind no clear trace. The white sneakers he wore, so distinctive against the night, were never spotted again. Dead ends multiplied. Without witnesses, without cameras, every possibility remained open. Had he met with someone waiting beyond the gates? Had he wandered into the woods and gotten lost? Or had something darker intervened on that deserted road? The silence deepened as days turned into weeks. For Forrest's family, it was unbearable. A boy doesn't just disappear, they insisted. Someone must have seen him. Someone must know. But the phones stayed quiet and the tips went nowhere. In the end, the mystery grew heavier not because of what was known, but because of what wasn't. Forrest's last steps existed only in imagination, pieced together from fragments that led to nowhere. The world had swallowed him whole, and all that remained was silence. For those who believed Forrest had run away, the assumption carried its own dangers. A 16-year-old boy on the road in December, without money, ID, or a plan, is more vulnerable than many imagine. Runaways are not just kids escaping rules. They are young lives exposed to the sharp edges of the world. The first hours are often the hardest. Hunger sets in quickly, and cold gnaws at every bone. Without shelter, the night becomes an enemy. In Virginia's winter, temperatures can dip below freezing, and even a sturdy Carhartt jacket offers little protection against long hours spent outside. The sneakers Forrest wore were meant for style, not survival. Beyond the weather, there are darker threats. Runaway teens often draw the attention of people willing to exploit them, offering rides that lead to danger, promises of safety that end in control. Highways like Route 58 or the stretches leading toward Danville have seen their share of drifters, truck stops, and strangers whose intentions are not always kind. A boy alone, tall but still just 16, would have been an easy target. Statistics tell the story that silence hides. Many runaways never return. Some fall victim to crime, others to accidents, still others to the simple, crushing weight of being unprepared for life on the streets. For parents, the thought is unbearable, that a child might step off school grounds and into a world waiting to swallow him whole. And yet, imagining Forest as a runaway raises its own contradictions. Why would he leave without money, without a clear plan? Did he truly believe he could walk through the freezing night into a new life? Or had someone convinced him it was possible? These are the harsh realities that sit at the heart of Forrest's case. If he ran away, the world outside those gates was far from forgiving. If he didn't, then something even more unsettling may have happened. Either way, the danger was immediate, and time was already against him. As days turned into weeks with no sign of Forrest, the vacuum of answers was quickly filled with theories. Each one tried to explain how a tall 16-year-old could vanish so completely, and each carried its own unsettling possibilities. The most common theory was the simplest. Forrest ran away, planning to hitchhike toward Danville or Durham. Some imagined him slipping onto a bus unnoticed, blending in as just another teenager with a backpack. But the lack of sightings raised doubts. With no ticket records, no reports of a boy matching his description, the runaway theory began to fray at the edges. Others suggested he had help. Perhaps an older friend or even a stranger was waiting beyond the campus gates. Maybe someone promised him freedom, a ride or a place to stay. To Forrest, desperate to escape the confines of Carlbrook, such an offer might have seemed like salvation. But to those looking back, the idea carries a darker shadow. What if that promise was a trap? A third theory focused on the woods themselves. South Boston's landscape is rural, filled with thickets, streams, and long, empty stretches of road. Could Forrest have become disoriented in the dark, wandering until exhaustion or exposure overcame him? Search efforts never uncovered remains, but the possibility of an accident could never be fully ruled out. And then came the whispers of foul play, stories of predators lurking near highways, of teens taken without a trace. Some wondered if Forrest had crossed paths with the wrong person at the wrong time. A single encounter on a cold, deserted road could have sealed his fate. Each theory circles the same chilling truth. No evidence has ever emerged to confirm or dismiss any of them. Forrest's disappearance remains a puzzle without edges, a story where every explanation feels possible and none feels complete. And as the years have stretched on, the question has only grown heavier. Was Forrest's fate chosen by his own steps or by the shadow of someone else's hand? For Forrest's family, the phone call that night carved a wound that never healed. At first, there was disbelief. How could a boy so tall, so visible, simply walk away without anyone noticing? Parents imagined scenarios that might make sense. Maybe he'd gotten lost. Maybe he'd catch a bus home. Maybe the phone would ring at any moment with his voice on the other end. But the days passed, and no call came. Every hour stretched like a rope pulling tighter around their hearts. His mother replayed their last conversations, searching for hidden meaning, for signs she might have missed. His father kept dialing numbers, hoping to hear a familiar voice. Each time the line stayed silent, the weight of absence pressed harder. Photos of Forrest became shrines. His sandy blonde hair, the scar on his chest, his blue eyes that carried both innocence and weariness. Family members described him as thoughtful, intelligent, sometimes restless, but always loved. To them, he wasn't a runaway. He was a son, a brother, a boy whose future still held promise. The holidays were the hardest. December blurred into Christmas, a season meant for warmth and reunion. Instead, it was filled with empty chairs at the table, gifts left unopened, prayers whispered into the cold night air. Every passing year marked another anniversary, not of celebration, but of loss. The community around South Boston offered sympathy, but sympathy wasn't enough. Flyers were printed, calls made, Please sent to local news. Forrest's name flickered in headlines, then faded as other stories took the spotlight. For his family, though, the spotlight never dimmed. They lived inside the missing, each day defined by questions without answers. In quiet moments, they held on to hope. Hope that he had survived somehow. Hope that he would walk back through the door, older but alive. Hope that one day the silence would break. But even as hope endured, grief ran beside it, a shadow that never left their side. When authorities first logged Forrest's disappearance, their conclusions set the tone for everything that followed. Runaway. The label carried weight. It meant there was no immediate crime to investigate, no urgent manhunt to launch. Instead, officials expected a boy to return on his own, once the thrill of escape wore off. In those first days, the search was minimal. Local officers checked bus depots, asked a few questions at convenience stores, scanned highways leading out of South Boston. But without money or ID, how far could he have gone? That question became both the justification and the limitation. If Forrest couldn't get far, perhaps he wasn't in danger. Perhaps he was simply hiding, waiting. For his family, this approach felt like abandonment. They begged for more. Dogs to track his scent, helicopters to sweep the woods, broader alerts across county lines. Instead, time slipped away. Every delay, every assumption, allowed whatever had happened to sink deeper into silence. Months turned into years, and the case grew colder. Files were stored, calls went unanswered, and tips dwindled. Forrest's name remained in databases, his description etched in missing persons reports, but the urgency was gone. Other cases filled the docket. New crises drew resources. For investigators, Forrest became a statistic. For his family, he remained everything. The phrase endangered runaway clung stubbornly to his case. It suggested choice, as if a 16-year-old could predict the consequences of leaving into the night. It suggested safety, as if runaways were immune to the dangers lurking beyond the gates. But the silence that followed spoke louder than the label. No sightings, no calls, no trace. In the end, the official response left more questions than answers. Was Forrest truly a runaway? Or did the runaway label bury the truth before it could be uncovered? The years passed, but Forrest remained 16 in the eyes of everyone who loved him. His missing poster became a time capsule. Sandy blonde hair, blue eyes that seemed to carry both defiance and quiet sadness, a scar across his chest. 6'2", lean at just 170 pounds, tall enough to be noticed in any crowd. Yet he had vanished so completely, as if the world had swallowed him whole. For his family, photographs took on a sacred weight, smiling snapshots from birthdays, school events, fleeting, candid moments. They replayed those images like film reels, each one a reminder of the boy who should have grown older, but never did. Every year when his birthday returned, candles were lit not in celebration, but in memory. He would be 21, then 25, now 31. But in their minds, he was forever frozen at 16, dressed in that dark hoodie and borrowed white sneakers. Communities that once whispered his name now spoke of him less and less. Time blurred his story into the long list of missing persons cases, faces printed and forgotten. But for those who knew him, Forrest was not just another statistic. He was a boy with humor, with dreams, with restlessness that might have led him into the night, but not into oblivion. Sometimes his mother imagined what he would look like now. Lines forming around his eyes, his shoulders broader, his voice deeper. She wondered if he had found peace somewhere, or if the silence meant something unthinkable. That haunting thought, that the boy she remembered would never age again, was the sharpest wound of all. In the end, remembering Forrest meant holding on to a ghost, a face that would never change, a story that refused to close. 16 years old and forever 16. The night of December 4th, 2010, still hangs heavy over South Boston, Virginia. A boy walked into the cold, leaving behind his dormitory, his classmates, his borrowed sneakers striking the gravel as the trees swallowed him whole. From that moment, silence has been his only trace. What became of Forrest? Did he reach the highway, thumbing for a ride that carried him beyond the maps drawn by investigators? Did he stumble in the woods, The winter night claiming him before dawn? Or did he meet someone waiting, a stranger whose promises of freedom ended in something far darker? The questions circle endlessly, without answers, without resolution. Authorities labeled him an endangered runaway. To some, that meant choice, that Forest wanted to leave. But choice cannot erase risk, and it cannot silence the ache of a family still searching for a son. His absence became a wound that time could not stitch closed. Every birthday, every holiday, every ordinary day stretched the distance between memory and reality, until his face was known only through fading photographs and missing posters curling at the edges. The world has a way of moving on. Cases grow cold, names fade from headlines, and the missing become whispers. Yet in homes where lights stay on late, where parents wait by the phone that never rings, the missing are never gone. Forrest is still 16 in their minds, still walking into that December night, still frozen at the edge of a story that refuses to end. And so the echoes remain, in the quiet of Virginia woods, in the unanswered questions of investigators, in the silence of a family that longs for closure. Some mysteries fade, others linger, refusing to let go. Forest's disappearance belongs to the latter, a story with no final chapter, only the haunting space where truth should be. If you followed this journey, you know the weight of that silence. And if this story has moved you, let it not fade. Like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to Silent Traces, because sometimes remembering is the only way we keep the missing alive.